On behalf of Friedrich-Naumann-Foundation for Freedom Pakistan office, our colleagues in the Munich office and Thomas Dehler Foundation, who have together organized this webinar about the situation in Pakistan after the torrential floods of 2022. I would like to welcome all of you, and I would like also to thank all the panelists and everybody active in preparing this panel. And I'm looking forward to really engaging discussion on a very pertinent topic. Friedrich-Naumann Foundation has been active in Pakistan since 1986, and as everywhere in the world, we are working for a society with a framework where people can actually realize their project of life. In Pakistan specifically, we are working on good governance. We are working about access to quality information, and we work for a democratic constitutional framework, and we support entrepreneurship, especially startups of marginalized groups. Now, this issue about the floods in Pakistan last year came as one of the major climate change disasters on a global scale, which has hit Pakistan, which had been in a very difficult situation already in a very, very bad moment, just coming out of the pandemic and then suffering also from multiple local and regional challenges. It was just the worst moment when 30% of the country was flooded and round about 9 million people were actually displaced from their homes. So this is a very serious discussion. After the floods, there was a huge debate about climate change and the responsibility also of the global north of supporting a country like Pakistan. Pakistan is among the 10 most climate sensitive countries in the world. And at the beginning of 2023, in a major donor conference in Geneva, the international community, and especially also the European Union and Germany, pledged round about $8 billion as means for reconstructing and mitigating climate change measures. Whether this is enough and how this can actually be best done, this is something that we would like to discuss tonight with our panelists who have various different perspectives, mainly on good governance, but also on the media and from a civil society perspective. And I hope for a very engaging discussions. And thank you so much, Wakar, for taking on this issue again. And over to you. You will introduce the participants and lead us through the discussion.
Thank you very much, Birgit. And of course, thank you very much, everyone, for joining us for this, for another edition of a Friedrich-Naumann Foundation event. And we're discussing once again the floods that took place in Pakistan. I'm honored to introduce the panelists who will be joining us this evening to discuss this very important topic, as Birgit pointed out. We are joined by Ms. Afia Salam, who is a climate activist and journalist. We're also joined by Ms. Sana Hoja, who is a women's rights and marginalized communities activist, especially related to flood affectees, amongst her other activities. And we're also joined by Mr. Mukhtar Ali, who is the executive director of the Center for Peace and Development Initiatives. We're, of course, honored to have all of them, and we look forward to hearing their various perspectives, as Birgit also pointed out. Now, before getting to our esteemed panelists, we'd like to just give everybody watching an overview about the situation in Pakistan in brief, and we're going to watch this Al Jazeera video, which introduces the situation in Pakistan as it currently stands. Please watch this.
About illnesses, lost crops, displaced communities, and the effects of what's happened this year will be felt for at least a generation. Climate change is making weather events more extreme, more dangerous. My name's Zain Basravi. I'm a correspondent for Al Jazeera. I've been covering Pakistan for about 20 years, and between us, I've never seen the magnitude of a crisis as bad as the floods that hit Pakistan this year. I covered the floods in 2010, and we spent much of that time in rural Sindh province back then. And what was fundamentally different this time was how many more people were displaced in such a short amount of time. If you look at it in terms of numbers, we're looking at UN and government estimates of about 33 million people affected, millions displaced, a landmass the size of the United Kingdom submerged in a matter of days. It really hits hard when you look at it one family at a time, one person at a time, one community at a time. We went to a rural village where we met one family who had taken shelter in what they thought was the newest, safest building in their village. And in the middle of the night, the rainfall was so heavy and so sudden that the roof of this building caved in and collapsed on everybody inside. But about 4 or 5 people, including 4 very young children, were killed.
The rain was not like this before. I just want to tell the world, prepare yourselves.
The survivors were just in complete shock. One of the mothers of 2 of the kids that died in this disaster couldn't even speak. She hadn't been able to speak for a week. And all she could do is move from one place to another and just sit with her children, just holding on to the children that survived the night. I remember at one point we were live in a location where there was, floodwaters behind us, and there was some people living in a tent encampments. And as the sun started going down, people started lighting fires to keep the bugs away, to stay warm, to cook their meals. One after another, fires started around these camps as families started to gather together. And just as it got dark, we heard the women begin to sing. The whole camp slowly started to sing together. And it was just these folks trying to have a little bit of peace, a little bit of normality, just trying to calm their kids down. And it was just a sort of strange, calm and peaceful moment in what was an absolutely chaotic situation. There is no doubt that climate change has absolutely made what is happening in Pakistan far more extreme. At the same time, climate change was not the reason for the enormous gap between the rich and the poor in Pakistan, the enormous disparity in wealth and resources, the lack of development and investment in infrastructure or early warning systems or water management systems. COP27 sounds like just another big global level summit style meeting that will be meaningless, absolutely meaningless to the people that are suffering at the sharpest end of the stick here. If these meetings and these leaders don't do something to bring tangible change to the daily lives of people suffering right now from the impacts of climate change, then those people will move from where they are towards bigger cities. They will move from their countries to other countries. We scratched the surface of what's happening on the ground in Pakistan. We could have spent months there and still not gotten to the heart of how bad this crisis is. People were just happy that someone was there to listen to what they were going through. We try to be as respectful as possible and focus on trying to tell their story. And that sort of helps to not focus on the absolute grief and trauma you are seeing people going through. We often meet people at the worst moments of their lives. And it's very humbling when those people in those circumstances receive you so warmly and are glad that you are there and are happy to open up to you.
That was, again, a very powerful video there we watched of Al Jazeera English discussing the impact of the floods here in Pakistan, especially on the Pakistani people, which is something we're going to try to highlight throughout this event as well. I'm now going to get to each of the panelists one by one. I'm going to ask them to introduce their own points of view on the topic today. And I'm going to start off with Ms. Afia Salam, who, as I said, is a climate activist and journalist, and she's going to be discussing the role of the media when it comes to disaster reporting, as well as just in the overall issue of climate change and the crisis in Pakistan? Ms. Salam, go ahead.
Thank you very much, and thank you, FNF, for the opportunity to, give our opinions about a disaster which has rightly been called unprecedented. I mean, this is a country which is prone to disasters. We've had hydro disasters before, but not one on a scale where you would see 1/3 of the country, inundated and over 33 million people displaced and devastated. As far as the role of the media is concerned, being from the media fraternity, it is very difficult for me to be very critical, knowing how the media works, knowing the paucity of resources, which means the technical resources as well as the human resource. But the problem I have is, as far as climate change is concerned, is that climate change somehow is seen only as a disaster event. So the issue of climate change is not getting the attention that it deserves. As Ms. Lum, in her opening remarks, very clearly stated that Pakistan is amongst the top 10 vulnerable countries. And it has been in that top 10 bracket for over a decade and a half. And yet you do not see that corresponding, threat awareness within the society, within different government departments, within the media itself. So it's just when the disaster has struck that now every other problem that is related to this disaster is being laid at the doorstep of climate change, which I feel is something very dangerous, because that sort of does not allow us to be self-critical, to be analytical, and to be able to, analyze the reasons why a meteorological event rolled into a huge calamity. Because generally we do agree within the environment, climate change, and the scientific fraternity, there's no such thing as a natural disaster. So if I want to make my point clear, had the people not been living in the areas which were in the path of the rivers and the hill torrents, would the damage have still been as bad? I don't think so. What we do have to acknowledge is that the rains were unprecedented, and the volume of water that came down was something that people were not prepared for. Again, that also is a human element. Why weren't they prepared for? The authorities should have known better. There should have been evacuation calls. There should have been safe havens where the evacuated communities should have been provided the assistance that they deserve as a human right. And because we were caught unprepared, we cannot lay all the blame on climate change. As far as the floods 2022 are concerned, there are only two aspects where I would fully, point to climate change. One was the geographical location of where the rain fell, because this happened during the monsoon period, but not in the monsoon region. South Punjab is not a monsoon region. Balochistan has never been a monsoon region. And the districts of Sindh adjoining Balochistan were also, the ones which received a very weakened monsoon system on its way out. So yes, that is climate change. And the volume of water that came down with the rains and the intensity and the continuity, 2, 3, 4 days of rain lashing down, that is what climate change was all about. But the coping capacity, the lack of coping capacity of our infrastructure, the poor quality of infrastructure, that is all human doing. And if now we don't learn to, learn from these mistakes, we don't do a vulnerability mapping of people who are allowed to go back to the same area which we now know is vulnerable, so then these disasters have been predicted to, recur. So what measures are we going to take, and are we going to keep on asking for assistance post-disaster? So I think we need to focus, the media needs to focus on the causes of this disaster having been unfolded on such a magnitude that we find ourselves, totally overwhelmed by it. and media hasn't. So media is not doing that kind of in-depth reporting. It is not doing the follow-ups. It has sort of gotten, it has dropped down from not only the headlines, the front page, the back page. It's very difficult to find these things even in the inside pages. There are only some media outlets which focus on environment and climate change and disaster and human and rights and development issues, which are still sending reporters to get those personal stories out. Personal stories, not just of misery, but of, the role models who are actually out there and helping the people. So, but that's just few and far between. So I'll stop here, and I'm sure there'll be other reasons to dilate on this.
Thank you very much, Ms. Salam, for that. Next, I'm going to go to Mr. Mukhtar Ali, who, as I said, is the Executive Director of the Center for Peace and Development Initiatives. He's going to be discussing good governance with us. Mr. Mukhtar Ali, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Rizvi. Thank you, FNF. I think it's, I would like to thank FNF for arranging this this discussion, because it's very important that we keep discussing the issues related to floods. If we look at our media, it seems that issue has already disappeared. It's not getting as much attention as it should have, and it's the same case in relation to when we discuss our politics. That in our politics too, politicians are no more talking about it. It's no longer, it seems, that is a priority issue that government should pay full attention to it and do its best to rehabilitate people and do the reconstruction work, whether it's about the infrastructure or the people, the homes and the schools, the people which were lost. So it's very important that organizations like FNF and CPDI and others, try their best to ensure that it remains in the limelight. As far as the governance issues are concerned, there's overall governance situation, in which we are operating. The long-term institutional issues, which have not been, where we have seen relatively smaller improvement. So, for instance, when it comes to a disaster response or climate change, we established the Ministry of Climate Change. We enacted an act, in 2017, which is about climate change. But when it comes to implementation, we see serious gaps. So, for instance, under that act, the Climate Change Council was to be established, but it was established only last year, and so far it has held only one meeting. This could be a very important and significant platform for ensuring coordination between different provinces, and not just between different provinces, but also between the local, provincial, and the federal levels. So we can see we can assess the political will that an act is passed in 2017, and its first meeting is held several years after that. Similarly, a climate change authority was to be established. It has not been established yet. Climate change fund was to be set up, not done yet. And the provincial levels also, we see some policy documents being prepared, but when it comes to legislation, but when it comes to implementation, there's a huge lag. Local governments could play a very important role in both in terms of preparedness, relief work, rehabilitation, all that. But even today, we don't have functional local governments anywhere in the country. Not even Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, where elections were held, about a year back. Similarly, in Sindh, elections have taken place, but local governments are still not functional. So, in my view, if the local governments were functional when this calamity hit us, we would have, thousands of people, volunteers, who had got elected, and they could have provided leadership. They could have helped the government, in mobilizing local resources and providing services and all that. So that opportunity was missed. So it was all left to the government officials. Sometimes they don't belong to the local areas. They don't understand the local areas. They don't have the kind of political capital, which, if mobilized in these distress situations, can be of huge benefit. So our typical model remains top-down, where the authorities at the provincial and centralized, so the authorities at the provincial level depend, on deputy commissioners and the people working for them. So so our reliance on local resources typically remains weak. So that's about the local government. As far as the provincial assemblies and parliaments are concerned, we know that there too we see a huge dysfunction. At National Assembly is currently without opposition. Debates that take place there, we don't see much focus on the flood situation. We would have, in a functional democracy, it's a common expectation that the parliamentary committees play a significant role in ensuring transparency and overseeing, the relief work, and ensuring that the funds allocated for disaster response are efficiently spent. But here we don't see that. So Public Accounts Committee, for instance, at the national level, at the federal level, is very dynamic, is very active, but few meetings, hardly any meeting with focus on disaster. As far as the provincial committee, Public Accounts Committee is concerned, it has remained almost dysfunctional. I visited its website today. There's no mention of any meeting that it has carried out or any report that it has prepared. So it remains kind of non-functional. As far as transparency is concerned, over the years, we have seen some improvement in terms of enactment of relevant laws. So for instance, at the federal level, now we have the Right of Access to Information Act, and the Federal Information Commission is quite active. Now it's up to the citizens, how they use that law. So if they need information, they can, of course, file an information request to NDMA or other relevant federal agencies. And if they don't get the information, they can file a complaint to the Information Commission and try to get that information. But I think while the commission is very active and ACT is also much better compared to the previous one, it's not being effectively used, partly because of lack of public awareness, especially in the Sindh province.
If I may just come in, I do apologize for interrupting you, but I just wanted to, if you allow me, get the conversation onto Ms. Foja as well. And of course, we'll come back to the points that you've made in the main conversation as well, just because I want to get the introductions out of the way so we can get into the crux of the conversation as well. I apologize for interrupting you, of course, sir. I wanted to, of course, bring, as I promised, Ms. Sana Hoja into the conversation as well. She is a women's rights and marginalized communities activist, as I said, and of course, related to flood affectees, apart from, of course, her other work that she has done as well. Sana, tell us about, of course, your experience, if you can, working with flood affectees.
Hello, everyone, and thank you once again. I think it's a great reminder for all of us that it's not over yet, because it's 6 months past floods and we think that it's over and everything is settled. But when we go down and see the situation is almost the same, people are, they don't have shelters and they do not have, food to eat, and, they are still in miseries. I would like to talk specifically about culture, because I'm representing Lahuti here, and we have been working since 2011 for the promotion of the indigenous musicians and musical instruments of South Asia. So I would like to highlight the struggles of that particular community when it comes to floods. We all know that Pakistan has incredible diversity when it comes to the cultural heritage, both tangible and intangible. If we talk about tangible, the estimate says that around 1.3 billion, around that much of the losses occurred in the culture sector. Specifically, we talk about the heritage sites, either that be Mohenjo-daro, or that be, Makli, or that be Hindu temples or Buddha stupas and others. But that's the sides that have structure. I think the loss much more than the tangible is intangible, and that the loss that we don't see, the loss of the mental trauma, the people who have been living here. When we talk about the local musicians or folk musicians, it's hard for them to survive, in the regular, in a normal life. So the floods had hit them hard because, the only way that they used to earn was through, going to some weddings and performing and going to some shows and, cultural events and getting the chance to perform. But with the infrastructure damage and, with the conditions, they are not even able to travel around. So their struggle is much more difficult because they're already facing, they already had these problems in the regular life, and then the floods had hit them hard. And when we talk about the role of media, I think when it comes to this indigenous community or the folk musicians or the local musicians, the role of media has, always remained a question, because that is a particular community that's never been highlighted until or unless they are associated with some big brands or some, commercial or corporate sector where they bring these people and, they try to earn some mileage out of them. Otherwise, they always remain ignored. And with the floods coming in, they are, this community is already disadvantaged and they are, more into misery and trouble. So I think media's role remained questioned because media always wants to pick up the stories where they get mileage or, which are the hot or, news for them or from where they can earn the money. And unfortunately, these poor artists can't bring them that mileage. So they always remain, their miseries are never, the camera never catches their miseries. And, the panelists who are here or the audience who is listening, they can recall that there was this artist in Balochistan and some random people shared his picture that he has lost his house and then he had to move from one place to another place. And those random pictures caught the attention of one particular artist. But what about the 1,000 other artists? And then when the organizations like Lahuti, they do the fundraising events for such artists, the same media journalists ask us to give them the free passes. So, they cannot even contribute a 500 rupees that would support that artist. So, the question is about the reporting and, with the reporting and with the media responsibility, there comes a responsibility of what kind of, it's not always about making money, but it's always about making the, right choices and, using your power for a social cause as well. I think that media has always disappointed us in that case.
All right, thank you very much, Ms. Foja. Really appreciate all three of our esteemed panelists' introductory remarks. I'm not going to go directly into the impact of conversation between Ms. Afia Salam, Mr. Mukhtar Ali, and Ms. Sana Foja. And Mr. Mukhtar, I'd like to start with you, if I may, and ask you about, the international help that has been promised to Pakistan, right? And Ms. Lam indicated numbers at the top of this conversation. And, we've also had Germany, which has recently just pledged a significant amount of money as well in help for climate resilience in Pakistan. Now, that's a lot of money to throw at this problem. And I use that term very, very purposefully because as you at the end of your comments were talking about transparency, I do openly wonder if we have enough of a transparent system in place to responsibly then use those funds towards, in fact, climate resilience. What are your thoughts on that?
You see, we have, of course, there is an overall system and we can discuss how much transparent it is. And within that, of course, as I said earlier, we have made some progress in terms of enacting right to information laws. We also have a democratic system, although, with dysfunctions within it. But, in any case, we have a parliament, we have provincial assemblies where debate takes place and also media that reports on it. So that there is an overall context that we can discuss, and within that, the challenges that we have. And there were then specific flood-related commitments which the Prime Minister made. including in Geneva, where he said that, every penny will be spent in a transparent manner. And he also promised that there would be third-party validation process. The Auditor General will audit the accounts, and the international assistance that will be received. The Prime Minister also inaugurated a digital platform, where people could track, how that money is being spent. So those commitments are there. We still have to see how they are implemented, how that third-party validation process will work, whether Auditor General, the process will be really robust and transparent. Our Auditor General does perform that function, but there have been complaints about its own performance. And even when it takes the reports to the Public Accounts Committee, sometimes we see huge time lags, the reports of previous years being discussed, and sometimes this can be a substantial lag. And I just mentioned in my earlier comments that as far as the Provincial Assembly Public Accounts Committee is concerned, it's not really functional. But the Prime Minister had also promised that, in addition to the Auditor General Office, they may engage a form of international repute who would do that audit. So I think some basic infrastructure does exist, but I think if the government is really serious about it, and we'll see, how good it performs on its commitment, then the first few things that it needs to do is to let, for example, Public Accounts Committee of the Sindh province should become functional with opposition's participation. Because if it is just left to the treasury benches, then its performance may not be as good as it should be.
Very well. And just before I move on to Ms. Salam, I just want to let everybody watching, of course, please do send in your questions, your comments, either if you're watching here on Zoom or you're watching via YouTube or Facebook. We'd love to, of course, have your questions and comments put to our panelists as well. Ms. Salam, I'd like to continue on that theme of the international help, right, that's coming in. And if that is where the solution really lies for the country, right? Is it in, as I said to Mr. Ali earlier, throwing money at the problem? So, I mean, this is a lot of money that we're talking about. We're not talking about small change. We're talking about a lot of money that's being given to Pakistan or pledged to Pakistan. But at the same time, that will come with conditions of having accountability. Are we going to be able to live up to that? And will that then mean, do you think, positive changes in the country?
So there are two things. There is something that we need to expect that they will live up to it, because you use the word pledges. That is something very important. Will the donors who pledged live up, and will they deliver? And that has always been a question mark, with the international community, and not just for Pakistan, because when you're talking climate change, the global climate assistance that was promised, that there was supposed to be a kitty of 100 billion, that never materialized. It never went beyond 60. We hear of Green Climate Fund, we have the Adaptation Fund. None of those funds actually, topped up to the level that they were supposed to. Now, loss and damage has also been agreed that will also be a mechanism now, but that's for the future. That's not going to come in just yet. And even if we do not give the name of those pledges, that what Pakistan is being given is sort of what loss and damage is supposed to be when it comes through. But the point is, right now, these are pledges. Now, I don't want to sound girlish and ungrateful. The international community has been very generous. Individual countries, many by multilateral institutions, they have given a lot of money. The concern you expressed, and you concerned that even Mukhtar was addressing about the transparency, accountability, and the judicious use of the money that is coming in. I do agree that things are not as bad as they used to be. The donors are also not just throwing money. There are conditionalities. There are watertight ways. There are oversight mechanisms set within those promises of delivery. So I think that's a good thing. I don't think that Pakistan should balk at the fact that, somebody will be breathing down their neck at how the money is going to be used, because it is very, very important that we use that money judiciously and prop up our structure and infrastructure and governance structure. So there will be tangibles and there will be intangibles. Yes, we need to build the brick and mortar structure. We need, where there's a huge housing crisis because of the damage that has, that the floods and rains have wrought. But other than that, there is a capacity crisis as well. That do we have the capacity to bounce back even to the level, even if we don't say go beyond that and at a better level, even to the level that we were at. And that means that the capacity building of the line departments, not just the infrastructure. Yes, we need proper drainage infrastructure, like Sindh definitely needs the drainage sector to be fixed. Not because, many of the things that have been appearing in the media, oh, these drains shouldn't have been there. People who know the geography, people who know the hydrology know that if these drains had not been there, it would have been even worse. What they need to understand is the geography of that portion where you still see 3 districts of Sindh underwater, is that there is very, very little gradient. It's just a 1 degree gradient to the sea after over 100 miles. And that means the water just is standing there. And we must not forget that the water is coming from South Punjab and Balochistan. So we need to fix those areas as well. And here is what we need to be transparent and accountable for, is that the plans have been made. The Federal Flood Commission had prepared the 4th flood protection plan. I think it was in 2012 or 14 or something. I attended that launch. I still have that with me, in which not only the river floods, because these were not river floods. So this is why I usually, when talking about these floods, don't mention 2010, because, people think it's the same thing. It isn't. The alluvial and the pluvial floods were both accounted for, how they are going to be dealt with, how the evacuation plans are going to be set in. We didn't see any of that. Then, as Mukhtar said, the civil society was dealt on death blow, almost with a sledgehammer. It was death with a sledgehammer, and decimated almost. So its capacity to deal with the communities, to be the first responders, was severely compromised. And yet it was the civil society organizations, the local organizations, which, despite the lack of resources, were the first responders. The government resources,
if I may, Afia, I do apologize for cutting you off in the middle, but in fact, I'm glad you mentioned civil society and local organizations, because in fact, I wanted to pick up on that point and bring Sana into the conversation on that point. Sana, you've worked with flood affectees, as I'm sure many of our panelists have as well, but I wanted to get your thoughts about your experience and what it has taught you about what the other panelists have spoken about, the local that one-on-one local civil society involvement in such situations, and the kind of transparency and or lack of possibly you may have seen on the ground.
As far as the role of civil society, or we may say a common citizen comes, we have seen that people coming out in support of the, the flood affectees. We have seen it in Karachi. We have seen it in the rest of the parts of the country, that people came and people donated, of course, at the time of a relief. I mean, it's a long journey. We are yet to go into the phase of rehabilitation, but as my co-panelists shared earlier, with the passage of time, the media and the common people, they lose their interest. So, this is no more a subject of interest for us. So yeah, in the initial couple of months, we did see a lot of contribution that that came across from from civil society and individuals. And that's where the platforms like Lahuti also played their role. So for instance, there is one way that you go to a flood affectee and say, okay, you are in a need of help, and here we are donating you. But then the other option is to, empower them, which is, I think, much more important. As I said, that it's just not about what they have lost, but the emotional and the mental trauma they are going through. So then we came up with the fundraising events. But in our fundraising events and fundraising concerts, we invited those musicians who were affected by floods. So, when we give them, when we pay them, it's because they came and performed, and they don't feel that they are helpless. Like if I go and donate, it's a one way of helping, which a lot of people did. But the empowerment also remains there. So the question here is that we do help people, but are we empowering them? Like if they have lost their, source of income, what we did for that. So I think that is what is most important at the moment, because we have passed down the relief. And in those fundraising events, the civil society, the students and the youth, they understood the cause and they came. But, then there was a majority, the group that was in a majority, they were like, hey, we have floods and you are calling people and you are dancing and you are throwing these concert parties. They did not realize the purpose behind that, because as I said earlier, that the people do not understand, they are not sensitized enough about the arts and the culture and the importance, and especially for those who possess that art and culture, whose bread and butter is, through the art, and they are the ones who carry forward the legacy. And so I do appreciate and understand the role of civil society, and they have been with the people at the time of drive, but it's temporary. As I said, that the journey is not ended. The miseries is still there on the ground, but if we see, most of the people have lost their interest. And especially at the times when we are going towards a rehabilitation now, or where, the Geneva conference happened, and whatever the pledges are, now the pledges have to be used for the reconstruction. So unfortunately, I don't see much of the civil society engagement when it comes to the part of rehabilitation, because now we are busy with our own lives and we have forgotten the misery of people until or unless, God forbid, in such climate disaster comes, and then, we realize it. So I think, as Afia shared earlier, that it should not be temporarily that we had floods and, then we are talking about floods. We had floods in 2010 as well. But what we did after that, like we came out, we protested, we, contributed, and then we forgotten. And the same thing happened again. So we have to go for, towards the, long-term sustainable solutions. And I would just say that when we talk about the long-term sustainable solutions, we do make, our policies that are inclusive of minorities, inclusive of the people who we consider vulnerable. So, they should be the part of this. And again, this particular, sector, our musicians who play the instruments at the temples, at the mazars, and the musicians, who have their bread and butter by this, a simple instrument, they should be the part of those policies that we always talk about.
Okay. Let me bring in Mr. Mukhtar on that point, because Mr. Mukhtar, you work in development, and obviously all of the above, as Sana there mentioned as well, are very important in that sector, because it's not, the economy, et cetera, or even just climate. It's about culture and many other factors as well. Gender balance as well comes into this play. I wonder, in the earlier comments that you made about the top-bottom versus bottom-up approach, if you could expand on the bottom-up factor in all this, because we can have international leverage, and as we've all spoken about already, that's very good, of course, and that is helpful at many levels. But until we don't have local level mobilization, it won't really actually start resolving the situations in these respective communities, which may or may not be the same situation in another respective community. What are your thoughts on that?
Okay. You see, one of our major failure has been our inability to establish functional, empowered local government systems. Because it's only through the local government systems that we can create local capacities, we can create local leadership, we can have a class of people who then enjoy people's trust and have the ability to mobilize them, create awareness at the local level, and so on. So they have the agency, because they're the ones who come from the local areas, they understand the local context, they have relationships, and they're invested in their local environment, because that's where they live, that's where their friends and families and communities live. We have experimented, of course, with number of local government systems, but we have never shown political will to really not only establish a system, but then sustain it and support it. Our approach typically remains the top-down, where provincial level leadership, whether it's bureaucratic or political, they don't want to devolve power. They typically see it as, if they do it, they would lose power. So that's kind of a shedding power. Why they would like to lose their own power? So they want to exercise that power and resources. Want to have monopoly. So even now that over 70 years have passed, we don't have functional local government systems. Now, if you look at it, from the climate change angle, whether we want to do the kind of mitigation work or adaptation work, this has to take place at the local level, of course, within some policy frameworks provided by the provincial or the federal government. So if the local governments are not there, then who will do it? The deputy commissioner who comes there sometimes for 6 months and then goes away. I mean, they keep coming and going, the bureaucracy. So how can they do it, And if we had the local government systems, we would have thousands of people. Now imagine, if in these flood affected districts, we had the union councils, we had the village council, we had the tahsils councils, hundreds of people working with in them and competing with each other. Ultimately, they're the ones who would like to get elected next time, so they're the ones who can be accountable to the people and responsible to the people. They would have, mobilized philanthropy. You see, whenever a calamity hits, we common people do come forward from Karachi, from Lahore, there are other big cities, neighboring districts, and so on. And they do their best, so they contribute to food, clothes, everything, But, they're individuals. So soon they lose interest. So only institutional efforts can continue beyond a certain period of time and, beyond the relief work and then for rehabilitation, reconstruction, all that. So this organized effort can happen either through civil society organizations, the ones which are incorporated, the ones which are which have some, which are organized, so the organized civil society. So they're the ones who can, who can have a sustained interest. These can be international organizations, they can have a sustained interest, or the local governments. But we don't have the functional local government systems. And over the past 5-10 years, we actually cracked down on the international organizations which were working in our country. Some of them were working for decades, So we didn't see a problem with them for decades. And, over the just last few years, we thought that they are somehow a security risk, How can a whole organization be a security risk? There can be some individuals within those organizations. So you can, deal with them, but throwing the whole organizations out of the country. So as a result, all that we are left with are some bureaucrats, who, as I said, often get transferred and who work for the provincial government, and their linkage with the local communities are typically very weak.
Afia, I wanted to bring you in on this, and what I keep hearing from our other panelists, Afia, is the idea of empowering local communities, right? And that's where the solution lies. Do you agree with that bottom-up approach? Because even in philosophy, we have the concept of situated knowledge, right, where you talk to the people who are in that situation and in that context to properly understand what they should and should not be doing going forward. And even researching for this event, and of course I'm new to this myself, but indigenous communities in Punjab, for example, sometimes will look at the way ants walk up or down trees to see if disaster is coming, because they have the knowledge that's been passed on to them by generations of people living within that same community. How important is such knowledge, and why isn't or should that be highlighted? Let me put it this way.
So it's extremely important, but I think we are talking here of two different things, both related to each other, or rather one leading to the other. So to have that repository of indigenous knowledge is very important. And communities do have them. I mean, they may not be able to articulate the terms that the the scientists or the academicians use. They may not know it is climate change that is changing the rainfall pattern, or the intensity is increasing, or why their crops are not, not maturing at the time that they are used to for generations. But they know something is happening. So that is one thing. As far as the response is concerned, my whole beef is with the kind of response which could have been much, much better had there been local government in place. Because that is the lowest tier. They know, it's a community approach. The local government, the smallest unit is so small that the mohalle wala will know who to catch or who to reach for help. And if that help is not forthcoming, that they are the ones who can go ahead, be held accountable. And I totally agree. DCs keep getting posted here and there. They're not really necessarily from the community of the area where the disaster has struck. They don't really know the culture. They don't know that if they move the people from one place to another, how the women will become restricted. They will completely lose their mobility and they will become more vulnerable than they already are. I mean, women are in any case disproportionately affected by climate change because of our cultural factors. They are not able to swim away from the torrent. They've got so many children to take care of. They are the caregivers, they are the nurturers, they are the caregivers not only of the children, which are so many that, they themselves, by bringing those children into this world, are very weak themselves physically. So all these things, they are a heavy burden on a woman. She is also supposed to take care of the livestock. And all these things, we must realize that they disproportionately burden the woman. And by burdening her, we make her more vulnerable. But that's a completely whole subject in itself. These vulnerabilities within complete vulnerability of countries struck by a disaster through flood. But so the accountability and the response can only come from the lowest level. That even this time, when those small organizations were asked by the government, I mean, the irony, it makes me so angry that the government, which actually decimated these organizations, then in the wake of disaster, asked them to come and help them. And those small organizations had to let go of staff. They didn't have the number of people who could go and help. They, of course, have no resources with which to. So when they were able to still rally, because that's what Pakistanis do. I hate the word resilience for what it has come to mean to Pakistan, that you keep getting hit. I'd rather not keep getting hit. But the point is that people do rally and support their other people. And we saw this. They are large-hearted people. They give for whatever they have. But the government, the DCs, then they said, we will tell you who you are supposed to help. We will identify the people. They don't know the people. It's a community who knows the people, and a representative from within the community should have been part of the governance mechanism. So our governance mechanism is like a pyramid which is levitating. It is not resting on the ground. We have, and even and it is the same for our disaster management body that was set up after spending millions, that we have an NDMA, we have a PDMA, we have got no functional DMAs. On paper, everything is allocated. When even in 2010, resources were allocated, how many boats DDMA will have, how many dewatering machines it will have. But there's no DDMA, which is supposed to be working in tandem with the local government. So our governance structure is also something that will require maybe diversion of some of those funds, which will come, because unless this is also kind of a disaster preparedness, foundation that we need to build.
Sana, I'd like to bring you into the conversation and in fact, highlight one of the things that Afia that just spoke about, and that is the gender aspect of this, because the Pakistani government has signed on to the Climate Change Gender Action Plan, which is known as CCGAP, if I'm saying that abbreviation correctly, which is in coordination with the International Union for Conservation of Nature, basically saying that they're going to highlight the gender aspect of climate change policy, where women are, also a major, of course, victim of climate change effects, especially in Pakistan, as Afia there mentioned, because of societal norms, etc. What are your thoughts on that as vis-a-vis your work and your experience?
In past couple of years, we have seen an increase in terms of the representation of women, not just in when it comes to the gender equality, in terms of a climate change or in terms of an environment. But, in overall aspects, we have seen the, women voice coming up and, the women talking about their rights, about the issues, and that's just not the, has to do with their domestic rights, but, in general, like if we see the Aurat March that happened in Islamabad, on 8th of March, one of their, agenda was to have the climate policies made in a way that they are women-centric. So, we see the number of women coming out, realizing that, the climate change is not, climate change has nothing to do with gender. It hits everyone equally, but of course, with the social barriers around and, the women are, of course, they are the ones who are hardest hit by it. And again, as I said, that not just hit by the structural disaster, but also, the trauma that they possess, because they are, waste sensitive. They are the ones who spend in our society. They are the ones who spend more time, in the home, or they go out and fetch the water from the wells. So, they have been involved in all the practices, and, they are emotionally connected to that. There's a routine part of it. And when such disaster occurs, they are the ones who are, of course, hit by it. But I have seen a change. I think the women are coming up and they are talking about their rights. And I think the social media has a role to play in that, where we can hear the, women talking about the issues. But as it's a long journey, because when I say social media, or when I talk about the specific medium of media, it just reflects or represents a group that has access to it. So we still have women who do not have access to social media. They are the women, they are those who do not have even the, proper electricity, or, they are living in their own world. And, so it's the sensitization needs to be done at the grassroots level as well. And as Afia and other panelists said that, the local councils have to play important roles. So for instance, when they make the community groups, are they led by women? When they talk about the water rights, are the women part of the water rights? When they talk about the environmental justice, do they consider women? Do we even think that, in our society, that the women are the ones who are impacted by climate change? So I think there is a need of a grassroots awareness as well, and making these women the heroes of a climate change, and how they fight with the climate change. And but I mean, it's something that's being acknowledged now. Firstly, it was like the people around, they did not even believe in climate change. They considered it's not a reality. But now we see a change in the narrative, a change in the mindset. So I think that is important. And the other thing which is very important is the indigenous wisdom, the indigenous wisdom that's there. Are we considering that as a part of the the climate change, when we talk about the climate change, or even about the climate rights, because that wisdom lies somewhere in our practical theories and philosophies, and we need to incorporate that while we talk about the policies or the reforms, or when we talk about moving forward, or making the disaster risk plans, or preparedness to avoid any such, at least
on the topic of knowledge. Sana, if I may come in, because I wanted to bring in Mr. Mukhtar on this topic. Mr. Mukhtar, I wanted to highlight the topic of education and education vis-a-vis climate change and climate resilience as well. There have been a number of policies and a number of initiatives throughout Pakistan which seemingly have succeeded. So what I was reading about was about in Gilgit-Baltistan, where there was a small project taken up by a number of teachers to introduce knowledge and education about climate resilience and climate change, not just in Pakistan, but globally as well. And that was seen as a huge success. How important is education as well in creating that awareness to really understand the changes that may be happening in these local communities? You're muted, Mr. Mutlaq.
Yeah, so awareness, education, of course, they're extremely important, and we need to move beyond the project approach, and we should somehow try to institutionalize it. And that can be done, of course, through media, through public services messages, where at least state media adopts it as a policy, and it's done throughout the year, not in cycles. Similarly, we need to embed it in our curriculum. We need to train our teachers so that it's not just in the books, but teachers are sensitized about it. So the more we do it, the better it would be. But I think in addition to that, what I would like to suggest is that, for instance, we're talking about local knowledge. So of course, the people living along the rivers and in different communities, they have this generational knowledge, and they always know. If you go sit with them, talk to them, they will know, when this flood in 2010 happened, how did we deal with it, or the earlier floods and so on, even if they have some history of rains and so on, So that remains within the communities. But we also need to understand that, the communities are also changing. There is a huge mobility in our society. People from communities move out, they come back and so on, they're exposed to a lot more other exposures. There's generation gap, sometimes young people don't spend as much time as they used to do, with their elders and so on, where they would learn about how things happened in the past and the previous stories. So all this now needs to somehow, captured, and this local knowledge need to become part of the official processes. Now, how that can happen? Is there a program whereby local stories, local knowledge is gathered, is collected, is we develop maps on the basis of that? Whether union councils are mandated to do it, the village councils, for most of the part they don't exist, but even when they exist, the legal frameworks, our legal framework for the local governments, which exist, is kind of a climate change blind. Of course, I mean, it doesn't even use that word. Of course, it talks about solid waste management and certain other things which you can say that they're linked with the climate change. But the climate change word is something that you won't find. And neither have these acts have been enacted with that perspective in mind that, we need to really mandate the local government so that they're able to do the mitigation work or the adaptation work. So if that is also one of the lens that is applied to development of the local government systems, then we would probably have a different approach. So one thing could be, for instance, if each village or the union council, after every disaster of this nature, if they have the capacity and provincial governments can contribute to that, then they should sit with people, discuss, what happened, how we could have, responded to it differently, what could have been the safer places, how can we, strengthen, let's say, our reconstruction strategies, earmarking the safer places, thinking about the future disasters and, preparing for that. This should actually happen at the village level, at the union council level. That's where they can draw on the local knowledge, the previous experience, the resources that they have, and also with of course, they can, if they need technical support, they can request the deputy commissioner or the provincial government and so on, So these local governments could be that link, but unfortunately, as I said, that remains kind of missing.
All right. Afia, I wanted to ask you about the health aspect of course, climate change as well, because that's a very important one, which we haven't yet discussed. And I want to get to that before we get to the Q&As as well, which we've gotten some very good ones. But, we have the National Clean Air Policy, and that's obviously a very positive move. It aims to improve the air quality by reducing, pollution in many cities, especially places like Lahore, which get a lot of smog and air pollution. But then, a number of statistics that have come out as well are quite worrying about the effect of this sort of pollution, right? So we have, the estimates are 235,000 premature deaths, life expectancy has gone down by 2.7 years. Now, these are not small numbers. These are very large numbers. What are your thoughts about the health aspect of all this?
So, a nation that is comprised of people with compromised health is not really a nation that can develop or that can progress. And it is not just the air quality that we need to focus on. There are a myriad of factors. We need to focus on the sexual reproductive health of the women because, well, that's half of Pakistan. And weaker women are bringing into this world physically weaker as well as stunted children who are not really going to be, contributing in a very positive manner to the national progress. The other thing is the water. Waterborne diseases are one of the worst, because they go across the length and breadth of Pakistan. Air quality, yes, the bigger cities, because of the way they are built, because of our lack of management of the fuel as well as the waste management, they are being impacted by it. But those are just pockets within our country. The streams of water run right across the country, and there's not a single person who doesn't use it. The end user, even in places where those streams are not directly running, the rivers are not running, Karachi doesn't have a river, but Karachi benefits of the river indus through the Kinjur Lake. And the poor quality of water, the discharge of effluents into that water is a huge health hazard. So we have to look at those things. Then during disasters, now this present disaster, and this is something witnessed during the 2010 disaster as well, the number of skin diseases that came up due to the contaminated water and the stagnant water. So and the traces of arsenic that have been found, there's enough research, scientific research, which our think tanks have done and which our scientific institutions have done, which show that there are traces of arsenic across the country. So what are we doing to our water bodies? And that whatever we are doing to it is impacting the health of the people who use that water. The way the groundwater, so not just the water bodies, we are also polluting our groundwater. The excessive extraction makes the salts leach up, and that ruins the health of the soil. And that leads to your food insecurity. So everything is linked. We cannot just, cherry pick up one issue and say, if we solve this, we're okay. We are not okay. Even if we solve the air quality issue, we are still not okay because the water quality issue has to be addressed. If we solve the water quality issue, the waste management issue has to be addressed because they are all linked to the health. And then comes the poor health infrastructure. Because yes, we are putting up very good tertiary care centers in the public sector as well. But what about primary care? How accessible is this primary care? And we must also remember there's another thing that we have to think of. It may seemingly have no linkage, but unless and until there are good road networks, the access to those health centers for the people living in far off places, not everybody along the main roads gets ill. People in far-flung places get ill and they have no way to get to the main road and then access some health center. So it's, unless and until we look at things holistically, and maybe, a pathway is there in the shape of the SDGs, that if we want to address SDG goal 1, then we have to maybe start with the SDG goal 17, which calls for collaboration, which calls for cooperation between building partnerships. And I think that is the only way to go. It's the only way to go for even countries where there are systems in place, but where in a country like ours, where there aren't, then that is where the public-private partnership, the civil society nexus, along with the government and the oversight and the transparency, the mechanisms of RTI, which will promote the access to that kind of a transparency, which Mukhtar Saab has been telling us about. All those things have to be looked at in a holistic manner. We cannot think that these are, there in boxes. Those boxes don't really have any boundaries.
All right, I'm going to get to some of the questions that have been put to our experts, and we've had a lot of them, and thank you, of course, for everyone who has sent them in. Ms. Sana Khoja, for you, and earlier on you had mentioned, Sana, as well, about the mental trauma that many of the people in these regions have gone through, right? Being affected by the floods or other calamities as well. What can you tell us about what you observed about any support that they may have gotten in dealing with that sort of trauma that they've gone through? Did you witness psychological support? Was your organization able to give any? And what do you think about the role of the government, local and or provincial or federal, in that as well?
So from my own experience, I would say that, in the times when, in such times of misery, it's the feeling of hope and, that you are with someone and they are not alone. I think these are the things that make people feel safer and better. And, so I think, when, like, as we discussed earlier, that, and you asked me that what was the role of civil society, and I mentioned that civil society contributed, like they stood with the people at the time of the drive. However, if you get a meal or if you get a shelter, that's something that, that's again, it's tangible and, you feel safe and sound, but it's actually the mental trauma that's being questioned about, that, it lasts. It's a misery, it's a journey of even, 2 days, or it lasted for a month or several months that impacts you. And at that time, it is when we have to be with the people. And, as I said, that at the moment, they also know that, the rest of the world has lost the interest because we are not there with them. Since we are a cultural organization, and as I said, that even at the time when we could have gone to those people and just, handed over them funds, we asked them to come to the city and perform. And, so giving them a platform, giving them this feel that, this, whatever happened happened for a time being, but, you are still an artist, you are empowered with your voice, and, you can play and perform and earn. I think that empowerment matters a lot. So, it's easy to collect. I think it's really easy to collect the funds and, go and hand it over to them. But empowering them is a lot more important. And, I've seen a lot of other organizations, working with these people. And, when we had this fundraising event, we brought the artists from Rahim Yar Khan, from Khairpur Nathan Shah, which was the hardest hit by the province, but we also was hardest hit by the floods in Sindh province. But we also brought the, the rural artisans, so that, the cities like Karachi, those were not impacted by the floods. They can come here, they can sell their products here, where the people still had a buying power, and they can buy, and, they can, they can support those artisans, and the artisans feel motivated and empowered, because they are getting the money with their hard-earned, things. So I think that is very important, how we strategize this entire mechanism of donations, how we are with them, at the time of drive. That is important, because that is something that the people need. The rest of the things, they forget easily, but it's a mental trauma. And especially, I think, for the women and the girls. And in the starting, the video that we saw, I mean, at the night, when the sky is dark and the lamps, turned off in the camps, it was the songs, it was the harmony, it was, the nature that made them feel that, they are together. So, I mean, the art, music has a power to, to make people feel that they are together. It has that empowering feeling. So, I would also say that the art has a very important role to play when, such natural disasters occur. That's where, you can communicate with those people without having any language or, words to say so.
Mr. Mukhtar, one of the questions for you was about foreign aid. And I know we've discussed some of this, but this is a different angle on that. And that is, of course, about the fact that there is always a danger for countries to become dependent on foreign aid, to for lack of a better word, if I may say this, have their hands out and sort of just ask for money. And that in and of itself will then lead to weak governance, because then there isn't that sort of impetus and motivation to fix the governing structures within the country. And this is the same case for climate change aid as well, and climate reparations or climate resilience funds. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I do.
That's for Mr. Mukhtar. I apologize.
Okay, sorry.
Go ahead,
Yeah.
Mr. Mukhtar. Go ahead.
I think it's partly correct that, dependence on foreign aid for local to address local problems can be addictive and can distract attention from local solutions. Of course, when we instead of looking outward, if we go to our own people and ask them to contribute, so then we'll also be accountable to them. So there is a relationship between the people who pay their taxes, and through those taxes they expect the ruling elite to resolve their problems. So with that, comes accountability. But if there is overwhelming dependence on international donors, and that's where that linkage somehow gets weakened. But I think we must also realize that problems like climate change, they cannot be mitigated or addressed, without global cooperation. Of course, if climate change is happening and we are victim of that, so it's not just our doing. There are bigger players, much bigger players, who have contributed to this climate change. So I think actually I am a strong proponent that climate change justice should be one strong plank of our foreign policy, whereby we are not just asking for it's not just the charity that we're demanding. We're demanding justice, because ultimately, they're bigger polluters and the bigger contributors to climate change, and we have a very small contribution, in the overall scheme. So I think, yes, as far as our local national governance is concerned, we have serious challenges. We need to address them. And for that, our attention should remain on informing citizens, on mobilizing citizens, on creating that awareness where people know their rights, they hold the elected leaders and the governments accountable, and also pay their taxes, and then track their money. But it's equally important that there's climate justice.
Afia, did you want to add anything to that regarding climate justice and just foreign aid dependency?
Absolutely. So I don't know if I would agree with the tag of charity as far as the assistance that is being provided to Pakistan or any other country which has been hit with a similar disaster, because we were not the only one. Africa was, Philippines was, even a large part of India was having the same kind of torrential rains, Philippines also. But my point is that these countries, the global south is the most impacted region, and it is also the smallest contributor to the emissions which has triggered climate change. So for one thing, what Mukhtar has said about climate justice, it demands, the fairness demands that the perpetrators need to first own up their responsibility. And if they are not willing to cut back on the emissions which are causing this damage at the scale that we have suffered from, then they have to, come to the forefront and help us cope with it. Because there's hardly anything for us to mitigate. Our contribution is less than 1%. But that does not, of course, mean that the shortcomings that we have at home, we sort of gloss over them and just say that we need this handout to cope up with the disaster. No, that we need to have our own house in order. We need to have our own governance mechanisms straightened out. We need to have transparency. We need to have accountability of how the money is spent. And if you take a look at the two reports that were presented in Geneva, the 4-hour and report, which is the reconstruction and rehabilitation report, and the assessment report after the floods. It was prepared with multilateral donor agencies as well as the development agencies, and they have built in within the demand, or rather the ask, of how that ask is going to be met and how it is going to be tracked and monitored. Because it's the taxpayers' money that the other countries give. They have to be answerable to their own taxpayers whether the money that is being given to countries like us is being judiciously spent. And if we do not show that we are using that money the way it is supposed to be used, then these disasters aren't going away. The climate change isn't going away unless and until those perpetrators roll back on their emissions. And there's very little conversation, that has taken place on that. Just the acknowledgement or apportionment of guilt is not enough. We cannot get away from climate change unless and until the perpetrators of climate change cut the emissions. So if they don't, then they will have to keep on paying, and we will have to keep on facing these brunts. And this is a zero-sum game. I mean, this cannot go on. So other than educating our own people on how to cope with these disasters, I think the climate diplomacy, the climate activism front also needs to remain very vigilant and very, very engaged. So that conversation also doesn't get sidetracked.
Sana, I wanted to bring you in because one of the questions was for you, Sana, about livelihoods, right? So you mentioned obviously the artists that you work with, and you mentioned the fact that obviously they undergo trauma, and you bring them into the cities sometimes as well to perform, so they're able to still be in touch with their art. But what about livelihoods in that regard? Because obviously this is an impact on that as well.
As far as the livelihood is concerned, these these folk musicians, if we talk specifically about, or the local artists, or even if we see in the broader system, create the people in the creative industries, unfortunately in Pakistan, do not completely rely on their music, or on the part of the art, any field of the art that they are doing. You see most of the musicians even in Pakistan, and until or unless there are some big names who have gone across borders and have made the name there, you see most of the musicians even in Pakistan, they either are no one is a full-time musicians. You find them, someone is a professor in some university, some has some other means of earning. So unfortunately, the creative industries are not very well established here. So even if we see in the, in the urban sector, the musicians and the artists, they take music as a passion, but they cannot completely rely on it as a part of their bread and butter. And when we talk about the, when we move towards the rural areas, the thing is same, and it's even more challenging. So, over there, you see you find most of the musicians who are the farmers, or, who have a very basic means of earning as per their rural settings. So, that's where when we talk about the mental trauma, because at that time they are not getting any, platforms to perform, but at the same time, their primary, means of bread and butter has also suffered. So I think it becomes more challenging for them, and especially when we see the last floods, when the crops were damaged and destroyed, and they did not have any shelter over their heads, and they had to move. So it becomes very difficult for that particular community. And I think at that time of a drive, their music becomes act as a pain reliever for them, because that's what they carry with. And unfortunately, you see a lot of musicians. I can, we have this musician who is playing, an indigenous musician, and he's the last one in the South Asia to play that instrument. But he's a mechanic. So, there is this has always been a challenging, unfortunately, for our folk musicians, because we have not accepted, that them as an artist, we still call them, we are, when I talk to you or the audience, I have to specify, okay, folk musician, a local musician, or a rural musician, because we do not have accepted them as a musician. So their journey and their misery is far, devastated, and it becomes very trickier for them. How we help them in that time of a drive. We when we did the fundraising events, and we kept a very minimal, fees for the ticket for that event, because we believe in the public festivity. We never charge for our events, but in that case, since the purpose was to fundraise, we kept a very minimal ticket of 250 rupees or 500 rupees. And then whatever the funds we generated, we asked them that what do they want and what is their primary need at the moment. And they came up with, then we have the options to provide them either a resilient housing or something like that, but they came up with the need of a clean water, because they had that dirty water standing there. And so what we did was, and again, we had this a university, and where the students at the time of the floods, they started developing those clean water filter plants that could clean up to 10,000 liters of water per day. Those are the portable filter plants. So we sent those filter plants to those villages, and we named those filter plants as per the artist's name, so that he has that sense of ownership as well. And since it's portable, in any tough circumstances, if he has to move from there to somewhere else, he can even carry that. So I mean,
I'm gonna interrupt you just because I
yeah.
apologize, because we're quickly running out of time, and I wanted to give Mr. Mukhtar just a time for just a very quick final comment. I do apologize, Mr. Mukhtar. I'm going to throw a heavy question at you. If you can do this under 2.5 minutes, I'd really appreciate it. But it's basically about the land takeovers that we have in Pakistan, right, and the effect that has both on climate resilience as well as just crops. And I mean, the list is really endless when you have land takeovers of of areas of farmland, etc. What are your thoughts on that, and the lack of governance in that regard?
See, even before the floods, we had very weak land records, and there are lots of disputes which end up in the courts basically about land demarcation and all that. So now with the floods and the kind of and the level of effects it has left behind, we can expect that those kinds of conflicts to rise. So basically there is a need to actually strengthen the revenue system, so that whenever there's that kind of dispute or those kind of issues, they are quickly resolved. So these can be resolved through a number of ways. Of course, there can be sometimes local solutions where communities themselves sort them out. And in other cases, the officials have to come in and play their role. But this is an area which remains understudied. Globally, we have some literature which talks about conflicts and around those kind of issues. But here, the relatively little attention has been paid to that part. And I think there's while we talk of governance, of course, there are typical disaster preparedness response mechanisms, which are mostly about relief and rehabilitation and all that. But I think within that context, it's equally important that we look into these issues also, not just about land demarcation and all that, and land grabs and all that, but that also the migration related conflicts. Sometimes communities have to move from one place to the other. Then there is a host community, and there's this incoming community, and there can be issues around that as well. So broadly, this is of course a governance issue. Land Revenue Department is the most relevant, but also then the police and the judiciary. These are the most relevant institutions. And yes, there's a huge challenge. But reform has been long overdue. Thank you.
Very well. We're going to leave it there at that, but I really want to appreciate and thank our esteemed panelists who have joined us today, Ms. Afia Salam, climate activist and journalist, Mr. Mukhtar Ali, Executive Director of the Center for Peace and Development Initiatives, and Ms. Sana Hoja, who is a women's rights and marginalized communities activist, especially related to flood at PakTs. And of course, everyone who sent in their questions and their comments and who watched, of course, and joined us, please do send in your comments and questions even after this event. And of course, feedback as well, as we always try to strive to improve our events for you. And of course, on behalf of the Friedrich-Naumann Foundation, myself, Ohar Rizvi, I'd really thank you all for joining and for watching as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.